Good morning. Our Mom Live chat is going to be a little different this morning because my partner is not feeling well. So I'm going to tell you a story from history. And this is a story where somebody had to overcome a lot in a very difficult time. Her name was Sadie Bushman, and her parents lived just outside of Gettysburg. And you can imagine what the story might be about. Sarah was almost 10 years old. And during that time, it was 1863, there were all kinds of rumors about soldiers coming and rebels and so on. And occasionally they did see some rebels. But at one point, the Union Pennsylvania volunteers came and filled the town. And so they all felt better. But one morning, July the 1st, 1863, her mother woke her up in the early morning hours and said, "You're going to have to leave. Grab your brother William and go to your grandmother's house," which was about 2 miles down the valley. She said, "I understand that 10,000 soldiers are headed our direction, and we could be in the middle of shelling." And so Sadie got up and dressed, grabbed her brother's hand, and headed to the street. Now, when she got there, it was not what she expected because there were people from town all over the place and they were running and shoving and screaming and they were yelling for people to get out of town. So it wasn't a very peaceful time. So she held her brother's hand and she just kept moving until she got to Seminary Ridge. And by the time she got there, she was with the Union Army and she was in the thick of battle. And if you've ever seen some of those black powder guns shot, there's lots of black powder in the air and there's horrible smells and sounds of men who are wounded and even dying at that point. And it was very noisy. There were officers shouting orders. And she realized that her life was in danger as well as William, but she just held onto his hand and kept moving toward Grandma's house until finally there was a very loud boom and a huge bright light. And a soldier grabbed her and pulled her aside. A shell had landed right beside her and had brushed her skirt. Well, the soldier was kind enough to take her out of the way on to her grandmother's house. But her grandmother's house was not really much better because even at that moment, her grandmother's house was full of wounded soldiers. And as she arrived, several soldiers brought a man whose leg was badly, badly damaged. And so a surgeon came up to them and said, "I'm going to have to take off his leg." And they said, "We can't stay. We got to go back. We're still fighting." So the surgeon turned to Sarah and said, "I need you to help me." And so she did. And she later described, she said, "I can remember every moment of that surgery, every cut that he did. I was supposed to give the soldier sips of water while he worked, but I saw everything." She said they took him and put him on a table under an apple tree in the yard and put his leg over a sawhorse and began to cut. And so she helped with the surgery and her parents didn't show up. So for 2 weeks, she stayed at her grandmother's house and simply did what she was told. She fed the patients who could not feed themselves. She gave everybody water. And it was a very long 2 weeks before her parents finally showed up, and they got caught up in the war too and weren't able to get there. Years later, the soldier that she helped wrote a letter. He couldn't find her and he couldn't find the surgeon. So he wrote a letter to the newspaper to thank the little girl who was 9 years old, who was very brave. And she was the bright light for all those soldiers in that dark time because she was very cheerful and obedient. And she tried to help them in the midst of a very hard time. Now, this is a lesson for us. We live in a time of massive upheaval. Our world is very different than it has been, and there's a lot of unease. But you're a mother, and you still have your kids to take care of, and you still have life to live. You can do this. You can be a mother in this difficult time because God is with you. You can turn to Him and be brave and wise and trust in Him, even in the midst of all kinds of chaos. This little girl is an example of what can happen when you're leaning on Christ, when you're obeying Him. You can be a light in a very dark place, and you can teach your children that we can live through very dark times with courage and strength. And this is a true story. Sarah later grew up, and her name was actually Sarah, not Sadie. Sadie was her nickname. She actually later grew up and moved to California and married, and then told her story, and that's where I read it. So, a true story to encourage you today with the truth that we all know. God is there, He is very real, and we can do what we need to do as moms to love our kids and even raise them well in a very hard time. Thank you, and I hope you have a lovely weekend.